Leah, welcome to Growing Pains. I am so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Alyson.
So, we are two gals with boys at home, and we started chatting before we pressed record about just like the joy of being a boy mom and a business owner. And I'm so excited for our conversation today because honestly, the little I do know about your story and what you went through regarding maternity leave and your business was like, honestly, it struck me. It's so incredible. And I know a lot of women will resonate. So, before we get into it, can you just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your family that you have at home?
Yes, I'm so excited to be here. So much to share. So, my name is Leah. I am a boy mom two times over, just like you. I love that we have this in common. I live in New York City, which is the first love of my life before I met my husband. I absolutely adore living here and raising our two boys here. I've had my business for 9 years this month, which is pretty incredible. But the
Congrats.
first 2 years, thank you. It's been a journey. The first 2 years almost don't count, but they actually are probably the most important because they were not pretty. It was really a struggle. And took a lot of just tenacity and grit to keep going because I was not making any money. I still had a 9 to 5 job. I was working as a paralegal and then at a nonprofit. So I was never making more than like $55,000 a year and trying to do this on the side. And I really almost came to a place where I threw in the towel. And as you know, the end of the story, I did not. I really kind of mustered up a place of going the extra distance, which worked. So after about 2 years, things started to change. I resigned. I had my first 5-figure month and had a really amazing few years after that where my business just kind of exploded before my eyes. And then things shifted about 3 years ago with the birth of my first son. Just ever so slightly actually. I didn't really change a ton right when he was born. It was more that I restructured things about 18 months into motherhood when I sort of had some shifts in priorities and just the way I viewed motherhood, which we can talk about if that feels helpful. But yeah, that's kind of when I shifted my business to be as focused on me as a coach and me as the brand to having more leveraged and scalable ways of serving clients. Still a coaching business. I absolutely love working with clients. It's not something I felt the need to burn to the ground, so to speak, but it
Mhm.
became unsustainable with being a mom. And that's when I sort of shifted to incorporating a more leveraged and passive stream and really worked on that for about a year and a half and then had my second son. And here I am, stay at home, mom of two boys, and I make about 10K a week.
That is amazing. And I'm super curious, Leah, because I think I've seen like your content and like stay at home mom. Let's unpack and double click there
Yes.
for a second because I think a lot of women who run businesses, whether passive or very active, consider themselves business owning moms, mompreneurs, whatever the vernacular that they want to use. Why do you resonate with stay at home mom?
It's such a good question. I think about talking about it more or kind of giving my back or just kind of my thoughts about it more because in reality, I think any mom can consider herself a stay-at-home mom if she is the primary caregiver of her child or
Totally.
even if she's not, even if she works from home, right? And I don't know that it really matters why we have our exact definitions. I think it just kind of depends on what it means to you. For me, the reason that I use that title and the reason it's important to me, even though I do still work, right? I am still also a working mom. I will never close my business, is because it very clearly was a transition for me from going from having a nanny to no longer having a nanny. So we had a nanny from my oldest son being like 10 weeks old 3 days a week
Mhm.
because I was a business owner and because I just didn't know how to take off more than 10 weeks from my business. And that didn't bother me so much at the time because though she did come when he was very young, I was still working from home. I still exclusively breastfed him. She only came a few hours a week. It didn't feel like this kind of jarring thing that I think a lot of women struggle to go through where you're home completely immersed in your baby and then you're completely gone and
Yeah.
out of the house for 40 hours a week. So it was kind of a gradual transition, but it was this element of like someone else is reliably and consistently helping raise my child, which I
Mhm.
didn't have an issue with. But at about 18 months, when I kind of mentioned I went through this, view transition, I did start to see that differently and think about the role I wanted to have differently. And I let go of her. And that is when I became what I consider to be a stay at home mom. Now, does this mean I don't ever have help? Of course not. I would never. I don't think any mom, no matter how much you don't have other responsibilities, should not allow herself to have babysitters or to go out on date nights with her husband or to drop her kids off at, the kids club so she can exercise. And I don't subscribe to any of that. But in my definition, I do not rely consistently on a daycare or a nanny. I am the primary person with my kids while I'm running my business. So that's why I care about that definition, because it to me represents that transition
Hmm.
in my own story.
Honestly, I love that you've put some words and more definition to that because it's interesting. I went through something similar when we moved to Colorado. So we moved at the end of 2024, and then we had a nanny who was with us when the kids were little. When we moved here, I first kind of jumped into, I guess, what would you call it was a habit, right? I was like, oh, well, we need a nanny here because
Right.
we had one there, right? And so we went through all the interviews and we did all the meetings and all the things. We staffed somebody. And then literally 4 times they came to our house. And I said to my husband, I was like, I'm going to shift my schedule. Like, I don't want to have a nanny
Yeah.
here. I want to be able to be with the kids.
Oh,
And it's interesting. I wonder like what brought that on? Like what like identity, what things seemed really important then that didn't maybe before. And not that they weren't, but maybe they just weren't top of the list, because I honestly didn't know what the heck was going on in my brain. Like, I loved our nanny in Pennsylvania where we moved from, and I was like, I really just want somebody to be part of the family and be supporting us and all these different things. And then when I really looked into it, I was like, no, I want to be that person. So what changed for you?
ugh, love that. First of all, do you know I was born and raised in Colorado?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, it's like it has my heart forever. It's the best
Oh my
state.
gosh. We
Yeah.
just moved back to the Springs. Honestly, we love it.
Oh my gosh, it is the best. It is the best. We're actually going in a week for spring break. But anyway, sorry, I had to just point that out. So I think there's two layers to it. I think that
Mm,
it's a great question, and there's kind of the answer of like why I think it's an important question and the answer of what it looked like for me. So the answer to why I think it's an important question is because I talk a lot about what I went through and how I let go of my nanny and how I built my business to make that possible. And I'm very proud of that.
mhm,
But I don't actually care if people have nannies or not. What I care about is whether or not you, as a mom, we as moms, take the moment to pause, especially as entrepreneurial moms, and ask ourselves, is this really what we want motherhood to look like? Because I think,
yeah.
similarly to you, I just assumed that I needed a nanny because I worked. I never even like, it never even crossed my mind that I could find a way to shift things around and shift my business around and shift my schedule around and like get creative so that I could be as much with them as possible as I am now. So I think that's the important thing is you just have to ask yourself, is this really the way I want motherhood to look? Because I do think a lot of us fall into defaults of what we saw our mothers do or what we saw our mother-in-laws do or what we see our friends do without consciously reminding ourselves that it was such a different landscape when we were growing up. I mean, now you really can. The way I make passive income, my parents wouldn't have even been able to, wrap their heads
Fathom.
around to all this time again. Like it was just, so different. So we really do have these opportunities to ask ourselves. Now, for some people, they might really sit and say, hey, I'm a much better mom because I have that dedicated childcare X days a week. And I think that that's a wonderful conclusion to come to. But it should come from that place of like, what do I most want out of motherhood? And then this, I guess the second part of that question, what I realized I wanted most out of motherhood happened when he was about 18 months old. I had just this shift where, what really triggered it is we started looking at preschools. We live in Manhattan. All the rumors are true about the competitiveness and craziness in the private school and applications. So we started looking at preschools when he was a little over, actually just almost 2, knowing he'd have to start in a year. And it just kind of hit me like once he's in school forever, really. Preschool is not full time, but then things change. He's not going to be at home with me full time. And I just kind of looked at how I was rushing his childhood in a way. I had him in all these classes. I had so much structure in his life. I had this nanny that was taking him to music class, French class, all of this. And we were preparing for preschool. And it just made me think, you know what, if I could shift this and give him less structure and figure out how I can kind of make my business work in accordance with what he needs, I could let go of her and spend this last bit of time with him fully at home while I can. And that just became more important to me. And I really actually did have a moment that I really remember when he was around 18 months old when I was at home with him one day and it was before a nap. And I just remember him picking up a book and coming and doing the little scoop back into me, how toddlers do, so he could sit on my lap and read it to
Mm,
and it just washed over me like, this should be me. I want this to be me. Not every day,
mhm.
but as much as I can. And that was a changing point.
Oh man, I love those little moments. Like,
They stick with you.
I know. And it's funny because when they come, you like don't expect them.
Right.
And then that makes them even more like I'm getting chills thinking about this right now. It's so interesting because you just feel saturated, right? You're like so grateful, so much love, so much presence. And so I also felt that way when I stopped like rushing things around. And I love what you've positioned here, Leah, because it really is embracing the seasonality of business and motherhood,
Right.
which I think is such an important conversation that we don't often talk about, especially my work that I do with, moms who are prepping for maternity leave. A lot of what we go through is, hey, listen, this is a new season of business and life. And it's also a very temporary, intense season of business and life, right? And so I think embracing that seasonality and always kind of being able to put everything on the chopping block, I guess, right? Be like, hey, listen, we could do less of this or we could do more of that and constantly shifting. Have you always been that type of business owner and professional, or is this something that has been newer since becoming a mom?
I think that I really did come into my business and started it with that mindset of life by design. And I think a lot of us say we want that, but we don't
Mm,
realize how much or like conditioned programming we have that make it hard for us to actually design things on our own.
totally.
And that was the case certainly with my career for a while. I wanted my own business, but like I told you, it took 2 years to get off the ground. And it was because I thought I was kind of doing the quote right things without realizing that I wasn't thinking out of the box. I wasn't asking the better
Mm,
questions. I wasn't pushing myself to do the uncomfortable things because I was afraid of what they meant. And when I had this moment of realizing I was doing the same thing with motherhood, it was I think it helped, that I had to break through that beforehand, but it doesn't mean that it's a natural thing to me or that I didn't have to exercise that muscle or that it's easy or comfortable for me. When you're breaking through and doing things a way people have said they never have or that you can't,
yeah.
it takes a great deal of faith.
It's interesting. I think about that with maternity leave specifically for us. Like a lot of the conditioning we have around that time is what corporations decided their
Right.
employees want
Right.
or need, or they're able to provide, or any of those things, or the government decides how many weeks you should be getting, or whatever that looks like. And so, my opinion on this is let's decide for ourselves. Let's just break the entire thing. Like, what if we didn't know anything about traditional maternity leave? Like, what would we want? What do we desire for our business and our family? And I think that looks entirely different for every single family. So what did your first maternity leave or that experience, like prepping to be out with baby in the very beginning, like what did that look like and what shifts did you make in your business?
They were so different, and I think I agree with you that maternity leave should look different for every mom and every family, and sometimes every baby, which is hard because you think
Mm.
you, like, plan for it one way, and then you've got it figured out, and then you have another, and it's a very different dynamic. I think the first time I was so not scared, but you just don't know what to expect, that I
Totally.
really felt like I need to, like, completely take off. I don't want anyone contacting me. I don't want any emails coming through. I need everything scheduled. I need my team to take care of everything. And I wanted to just sort of do it shorter, but very intense and like completely off, and then come back in and as I did have childcare. So what I mostly did to prepare for that was I made sure my team was very organized. I even did practice maternity leaves when I was pregnant where I would like leave
Amazing.
for a day, yeah, and like watch them on Slack to try to figure things out or a week or a few days and just like get out of my business and see how they did. And I do think that that was a very helpful thing for them and for me to see. What I think it taught me though, for me and my personality was that I didn't need such a big ship, so to speak, running in order to keep my business afloat. And there would have been nothing wrong with, and what I ended up doing more this time was just kind of simplifying things a bit instead of trying to
Mm.
keep my, launches running as usual, all my programs running as usual, all my clients running as usual, and giving myself permission to pause things or wait until I got back instead of relying on other people to run them the whole time. They did a great job. This is not anything about my team getting, that they didn't step up to the plate. I just don't know that I needed it because in the end, it
Yeah,
sort of felt like even though I was disconnected from it, it almost was harder to be totally out of it than to feel like I was clued into it and to have it a little bit more minimally, if that makes sense. So I
totally.
mostly did team stuff, practice stuff, SOPs, just tried to keep everything running exactly as if I wasn't there the first time around for 9 or 10 weeks. And then I came back in and I did restructure things in the sense that I just kind of worked less. I had a lot more intensity around my boundaries. Here are my hours. Here's when I can and can't turn off. This time around, I think because I just chose a simpler route and I have just kind of simplified my business, honestly, since my first son was born. I've been very transparent that I don't make as much money as I used to. And that's a
Mhm.
choice I've been very willing to make. You know, my numbers, my revenue is lower. But when you look at how many hours I work now versus how much I worked then, my hourly pay is significantly higher.
More.
And I think those are
Totally.
numbers that we don't talk about enough, or that aren't as easy to, display on the internet, but actually matter sometimes a heck of a lot more than just your top line revenue. So I've been simplifying things. I have a smaller team now than I used to. I have fewer clients now than I used to. And I just wasn't afraid to pause things. I wasn't afraid to put things on the back burner until I got back. But I also wasn't afraid to be in the know when I had my second. I wasn't, I kind of divided my maternity leave into, or re-entering my business into, two phases. At first, it was like, I'm out, I'm not working at all. Then there was sort of a phase of like, I can execute, I just can't be a CEO in a sense. So I wasn't
Mm.
actively selling, I wasn't launching, I wasn't strategizing. I just was sort of delivering on the things that I already had sold and already had, engaged on. That felt very good to me, not only because it felt like, great, I get to be back in my business and, I am able to keep things running in some extent. That did feel good. But weirdly, I think even though I actually enjoy the newborn phase, you are so out of your freaking element. And it
Totally.
felt good to kind of be good at something. I'm very good at business coaching. So just having that little bit of outlet, like for an hour a day, to be like, oh, yeah, I'm actually very, very good at this, even though this is so wild having two young kids, kind
Mhm.
of gave me some confidence. And I think that some people might sound like that sounds really, I was working pretty soon after having him, but it worked for me. And then really only recently have I slowly emerged back into that more top line, big picture thinking.
Mm. You know how many people, Leah, come to me and they're like, "I want to work and I feel guilty."
I believe
I'm
it.
not I'm not joking. I mean,
I
so
believe
many
it.
women say this to me. They're like, "My business feels like a sanctuary. I'm so good at what I do," similar to what you were talking about. And I think as business owning moms, like we forget that our business was kind of our first baby, right? Like we
Right.
launched this thing, we gave it all the nurturing in the beginning. Like think about your 2 years to get off the ground. Like that's the like the baby and toddler phase. Like
Right.
it's so I think we forget sometimes because it's so part of like who we are and our life and everything. And becoming a mom is like totally different, but the threads are there for sure, right? So, I think how did you tackle that? Like when you were working, you were like, I'm going to do the things that I have already promised. And like, when did you, or what boundaries maybe did you create around the work that you were doing and weren't doing? Because I know a lot of women who come back from maternity leave or even from vacation and they're just like thrown into the deep end again. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is out of control. Did you put any boundaries with your team or with your clients around things that you would and wouldn't do?
I don't feel like I have to put in boundaries around like them contacting me, or how I feel. I mean, I have a very, my clients, most of them have been with me for years at this point. We have over a 70% retention rate. I have a good relationship with them. I'm not in a situation where I feel like people are, um, taking advantage is a harsh way to put it, but I know that experience. And I think what fries a lot of people, what burns them out, is when they feel like they're giving a client what they're paying for, but the client wants more and more and more, and you feel like, oh my gosh, I just can't keep up with what they want. I don't have that
Mhm.
experience with my clients anymore because I'm proactive about those boundaries. I didn't have to kind of like go retroactively do it once I had my second baby. I think I'm just very clear about who I'm willing to work with and not at this point. So it never
Mhm.
has that feeling of like it's taking energy from me, which is a fortunate place to be in. And I think the product of having done this for many years and knowing
Mhm.
who I work well with and having all this trust with clients, so that they, like I said, I have a very high retention rate. People tend to stay with me for years, which is a huge gift. So I didn't feel like I had to be that strict about it. Internally, though, it is hard as an entrepreneur when you really have that bug to feel like, I hate to say it this way, but almost feel like you're limiting your potential because you feel like,
Mhm.
man, I have all these ideas. I'm ready to get back in the game. I have so much I could do. And I'm breastfeeding 8 hours a day. So one or the other has to give. And something that's helped me a lot since having my second son is just every month, because things change so quickly, at the beginning of the month, just rank your priorities for the month. And then unapologetically, you have to just say no to what isn't in those top priorities that month. And it can change. And I think what you spoke about with seasons is so important because it does help you remember that this will pass. In a month, you can reevaluate. And a big thing with the life I've chosen about not having, a primary nanny or a primary daycare is that they're going to be in school in a few years and things are going to change then. It's not like this is me kissing away my ambition for the rest of my life. It's just me wanting to be really present while they're at home. And if my priority that month is being with them. We're on spring break right now, so I'm working even less than usual. I just have to remind myself when those ideas come in, this is a parking lot. This isn't something I'm driving forward right now. Conversely, when my priority was trying to get healthy again after not sleeping and breastfeeding and all the things that you go through when you have a baby, I had to not feel guilty about bringing my kids to the kids club at my gym, even though I've chosen to be a stay-at-home mom, because my health is my priority. And I think
Mhm.
if you can come back to that ownership, it's not even that I think it's a good thing. I think you don't have a choice. Otherwise, you're going to put yourself in a lose-lose situation. You can't have everything be your priority at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's a really important caveat because there are so many fronts, right, that we're trying to grow, right? We're trying to be intentional moms and learn how to, shepherd these young kids into adulthood and adolescence and whatever stage of, motherhood. And then also take care of us, like ever changing, ever learning, always, growing type of beings. And then also this business that's probably taken a shape of its own and has multiple other players and other personalities. So I love that priorities. And I love that you're thinking in month long timelines because
Mm.
I think a lot of business owners get stuck in that task list needs to get done this week timeline. And I don't know about you, but I've learned and leaned in a little bit more to my femininity since becoming a mom. Like before, if I told my 23-year-old, 24-year-old self that I was like planning my actions based on my cycle, I would be like, you're silly and we should just try to get this all done this week. Okay. Suck it up.
Totally.
But literally, I see so many moms that I have this to-do list and it's never ending and everything that didn't get done last week has to get done this week. And I'm like, what if we just brought in the horizons? Like, what if
Mm.
we just decided that everything happens in time in this 30-day kind of chunk? And so were you always thinking in month-long cycles or were you no? Okay. So when did that shift?
In this way that I'm talking about, this kind of like monthly priority when I
Mhm.
had this baby, basically when I
Mm.
had this baby, because it was so overwhelming to think about a year or, the next few years or even a quarter, which is kind of how I think in business. I typically
Yeah.
plan things on a quarterly basis. So just until then. But before I had both of them, I also did do the monthly cycles with business thing and it's amazing. It's kind of like
It
a
really
superpower.
is.
Yeah.
It super is, and honestly, it's kind of like a yeah, it's like a little cheat code for sure, and I don't know about you, and let's talk about, like, this year, and I wanna, like, hear a little bit more about, like, what you have on the horizon and how things are moving forward. So I'm curious to hear I know you said that you plan on quarters typically, and I'm sure you probably do that with your, clients and things that you have. I don't know why. For some reason this year particularly, I don't know if it's like this year for the world or what, like I just felt like I was like, I can't plan this year for some
Right.
reason. And I'm so planned. Everybody who knows and listens to the show, and I told you before, like I'm an operations person. Like operations people create plans. Type A business owning people they create plans. And for whatever reason, I find myself kind of shrinking back from a plan because I've been leaning more into like the habits. I'm like, okay, if I do this habit, then there is no goal. It's just I do this thing over and over, and then whatever ends up happening from it is the amazing outcome that I desire. So I'm curious to hear, do you still do quarterly planning? Has that changed this year at all for you?
Not really. I mean, it's a little bit of both. So I do have two pretty big rules of thumb in my business that I learned the lessons the hard way. The first is I have stopped planning launches, programs, creating new things pretty much since I hit my first six figures years ago because I really learned that I think a big place that business owners trip over themselves is going too wide and not deep enough and
Mm.
just trying to create too many things. And in fact, when I had my first seven-figure sales year, I sold the same things I was selling at six figures. It wasn't like that I
Mhm.
created all this new stuff. It was that I just got a lot better at creating or selling and launching and optimizing and marketing and testing and delivering on the things that I had at my first six-figure year. So
Mhm.
really the way I think, one of my rules is just instead of thinking like, what am I creating? What am I launching? What are we doing? It's more just like what body of work am I really doubling down on right now? Or what product or service am I perfecting right now? And if it gets to a place where it's quote perfect, or it just gets to a place where I don't really need to be maintaining it or testing it as much, then I can move on. But that typically that takes years. It really does.
Years. Yes.
Years. Yeah. That's kind of a rule of thumb that I live by. And then the other is I don't really have financial goals anymore. Sure, we all have the milestones that we eventually want to hit next, but I don't have a timeline. I don't have a financial goal and then work backward. I used to, but when I had my first six-figure sales month, I learned kind of the hard way that, it happened after two failed tries. And it really, really was clear to me that the reason that I thought it failed the first two times is because I did it that way. I went into those months
Mhm.
thinking, this is the month I want to have a six-figure sales month. And I would make all these spreadsheets and like light candles at night in my bath and write it down on, my journal and have it be like what I dedicate a yoga class to. And I would just try to consistently every week reverse engineer. I was so obsessed with it. And when I finally hit it, I didn't even have it as a goal that month. I was just focused on what I was actually doing that month and how I was connecting with people and how I was
Mhm.
serving them and what I was selling. So I don't have that financial goal this year. I don't have the launch plan this year. Instead, I just kind of know what in my business we're working on to no end, like until I'm satisfied with it, basically.
Totally.
And I know that the financial goals will continue to grow with it. That's kind of how I'm thinking about it. In terms of my quarterly plans, it's not so much that I plan quarterly, but I do quarterly like evaluations where I look at our
Mhm.
numbers and I look at our conversions and I look at what the kind of bottleneck is in our funnels and
Mhm.
focus pretty exclusively on whatever it is for the next 90 days that I do stand by. And honestly, I think in this landscape in 2025, I think things need longer than 90 days.
100%. We've seen like specifically marketing campaigns, paid ads, that sort of thing, just take a little longer to get up and running, to start to see the results, to materialize. So we've also been giving things a little bit longer to just settle in. I think trust is at an all-time low these days.
Agreed.
And the fact of it is like we need to be consistent and we need to earn our audience's trust. So I'm curious, is that playing a factor in your strategy for 25 and what are you guys really focused on this year?
I have so many theories on why this is the case. The post-pandemic era we live in, AI,
Mhm.
people starting online businesses that really shouldn't have. I don't want to say it like they had no business starting it because it's a free market. Everyone can start what they want. But I do think
Mhm.
that people felt like they maybe invested in things or experienced things that were not what they thought they were going to be, which can happen for a variety of reasons.
Mhm.
So we just spend more time on trust building, relationship building, nurturing now more than ever. And part of it is because the other kind of sandwich parts of our funnels, like lead generation and sales itself, are pretty strong. I think if they're very weak, if you have no lead generation, it really doesn't matter how much trust building you're doing because you
Yeah,
don't have anyone to build trust with.
that's
And
right.
similarly, if you don't know how to sell them into it, then that's gonna, you do kind of have to have some structure on all fronts before you can optimize. But yeah, I mean, I would say nurturing is the main thing I'm focused on and what I'm encouraging most of my clients to focus on as well in general. And it's hard because you have to be patient and you just don't get to see these results as fast as maybe you once did or as other people are reporting. But it's important. And frankly, I think people deserve it because there is a big lack of trust out there. And I think it's our job to earn people's trust.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, having almost been in business for myself for a decade, I'm like a dinosaur in like online business world. It's so wild to even think about. And a lot of the folks who, I think are really leaning into the tried and the true, that trust, that nurture, they need to have experience and they need to have stuff to say, or
Right.
they need to be able to say the same thing. And I like that you mentioned patience because it's funny. I was at a mastermind a couple weeks ago and they were talking about like storytelling particularly and with nurture and your marketing and whatnot. And I was like, yeah, this is something that I've always done. Like I've always just written stories and written emails to my email list and done all those things. And one of the gals was like, you think someone remembers your story, but they
Mm.
don't. So they want to hear it like again and again and again and again. They want to hear it different ways. They want to hear different inflections and all the stuff. And so I like that you highlighted patience because I feel like it takes massive amount of patience to dig deep into the well of all the experiences that you've had and like honestly really show who you are because I think a lot of what is online can be perceived as smoke and mirrors. It can be
Sure.
perceived as like clickbait and conversion bait. And I think it does take a lot to really just foster that trust.
I totally agree. I totally agree. Yeah, I could go on for you with you about that for a long time, but it's true, especially for those of us that have been doing it for a while. It's easy to forget that not everyone has seen everything we've done for the past 9 years.
That's right.
But even if you're new, you have to. I actually think people who are newer are more at risk of this because they are more afraid of being repetitive or boring people, and you forget that a lot of people don't even see what you said to begin with. And it might feel like, "Oh, I just talked about that last week," and you have to talk about it again.
No, totally. It's so and it is trust building because it's consistent, right? Like if the
Right,
messaging you're using is consistent and the stories you're telling are consistent, someone's going to hear it for the 10th time, 11th time and then sign up for your webinar. You know what I
right,
mean?
right.
It is that fostering and that trust. Well, hey, let's talk about what's on the horizon. I'm excited. What's an exciting thing that you're working on and what are you looking forward to this year?
I That's a great question. I think the most exciting thing in my business that I know of right now is that my mastermind, which is kind of the crown jewel of my business, that's really the only coaching I do still. Sometimes I do one-on-one work if it pops up. It's typically full, but my mastermind is really it's the only group program I fully run and I really love it. And we're doing our first retreat in Paris this year. Typically we do New
Wow.
York and Miami or New York and Hollywood or New York and remote. So it's like very much a pinch me moment that I like have managed to find 12 women to go to a different country to mastermind together. So that's something that's really exciting.
Amazing.
We have our New York retreat next month, so I'm looking forward to that too. It'll be great, but I do think it's a pretty full circle moment that I'm bringing everyone to Paris. But other than that, I think it's just continuing to pour into the things we've done. I have a very good passive income product that I've really worked at since letting go of my nanny, and that's just continuing to grow. I have a very good course that I continue to talk about, and I'm not creating anything new. I'm not doing anything extra to, try to. I know it's so easy to just feel like, oh, well, all these people want this, so I should give them this. And it's
Mhm.
really, really important to stick with what you're doing and make the most of it. So that's really, it's kind of a boring answer, but I don't have this big, like, here's what's brand new. I'm rolling out a membership, none of that. It's
Mm.
more just making what I'm doing well even better.
I love that. And I love the permission too that you're giving anybody who's listening or folks in your community to just not do all the things because I think you can do a lot of things sort of well, or you can do a very few things really well. And that is just, I think, what separates a lot of the really great business owners who end up skyrocketing 8, 9 figures and above from the folks who are high 6, 7 and just repeat, and kind of launch new programs, close them down, launch another program, close it down. A lot of the folks that I've worked with, even at operations agency, they're like, no, I have this one thing. Like, I just
Right.
got this one program. And the only thing we do is launch twice a year to fill it. And it's so great because it's just simple and everybody knows. And I think there's something to be said about, a lot of folks that pursue growth and I think growth is important, but growth also happens like beneath the surface versus above the surface. So
Right.
like creating those systems and being able to maintain a really profitable, really enjoyful, am I making up words here? Really great business, like year over year, right? Like there's no reason why that is less exciting than the super high growth. And it just depends on what season that you're actually in.
Right. I totally agree with you in that. What I've seen from a lot of my clients is that doing a lot of things well works, but you will bottleneck at a very specifically, I have to say, around $200,000, maybe give or take $50,000. You can maybe get to a quarter of a million doing like all the things pretty well. But
Mhm.
I think people really struggle to get out of it because it is a very different mindset the way we're talking about here, where you then kind of have to stop creating things, stop with the shiny object, stop with the new strategy, stop with the new guru, all of those things that might have worked when you didn't really have anything in place. and double down on one thing and go
Mhm.
exactly like you're saying, the growth beneath the surface. You have to go deeper instead of wider. And it's a different skill
Mhm.
set and it's a different way to use your brain. And I think it feels almost stifling to people when they've been so excited about creativity and freedom and creation, and reframing your mindset to realize that reliability and just a level of excellence is very freeing in a different way. When you know that you have an
Totally.
amazing product that you can super back up and that you know people want, and you have market research and you have
Mhm.
testimonials and you have a way to convey that problem as a, or the solution to a problem, that brings a lot more freedom, honestly, than being in a hamster wheel, creating something new every month and then just kind of burning yourself out.
Totally, especially when that creation wheel is, like, out of scarcity and not out of, like, overflow,
Right.
you
Not out
know?
of like creativity. It's like, I have to.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I see this all the time with my systems work and my operations strategy. Oftentimes, folks will be like, "Well, I don't want a fully operationalized business because it's going to be full of red tape, or I'm not going to be able to be creative." I'm like, "Well, if you think about operations like laying a really thick foundation for your dream home, like the whole dream home has to come down if the foundation isn't sturdy." And so when you create that really thick foundation and create the systems and the repeatability and that predictability, I think it is actually much more of a creative space to operate from rather than being like, I think my house is going to fall down any minute. Let's put some plaster on these walls.
Totally. I totally agree.
Yeah. Well, okay, Leah, thank you so much for, first of all, taking time to hang with me on your spring break. I did not know that you guys were on spring break. So thank you so much for blocking out some time. If folks want to get more of what you've got going on, follow along and get in touch with you, how is the best way to do that?
Thank you so much for having me. The best way is to reach out to me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Leah Gervais with an underscore at the end. And you also can go to my website, leahgervais.com, and check out more there.
Yay, super exciting. As we wrap up, honestly, again, I just can't thank you enough for spending all this time on the show. Anything that you want to leave moms with who are in the thick of growing businesses and raising families at home?
Oh, well, I do have something I can share, but we could probably do a whole other podcast episode on it. I think you have to look at the structure of your business. That's obvious. If you have a business that requires you to physically show up for every piece of it, for the marketing, for the delivery, for you're leading the team meetings, you're leading the sales calls, that's obviously not going to work if you want to buy more time back to be with your children. That doesn't mean you can't do that if you're a mom and that's how you want to function. But I think a lot of times when people hear my story or they re-examine their own relationship with work and motherhood, that's obvious. I need to restructure things. I need to have something a bit more scalable and a bit more leveraged. The part that I don't think people think about as much is also challenging your parenting assumptions, not just how you run your business, but how you run your household. And that really made a big difference for me as well. I think that my business and taking things more passive and creating my passive products and really fine-tuning my ads to have them be running like a well-oiled machine was obviously a huge part of it. It couldn't have happened without it. But also just thinking about what's best for your kids and what's best for your family. And I could kind of open up a can of worms here, but just thinking about if you really want them scheduled as much as you think you do, is that actually are you just replacing an overly scheduled business for an overly scheduled home life? Is that actually what you
Mm,
want? Are you delegating the things you want to delegate? Yes, I don't have a nanny or a daycare, but we don't do our own laundry. We don't do our own meal prep. There are other things I've had to get really creative about. And are you guilting yourself into thinking that whenever you're with your children, you have to be literally entertaining them? Because I think that's a fast track to mom burnout too. So just be
mhm.
on the guard for like mom burnout. Not everything will happen because of your business. I also think just making sure you feel supported and leveraged and like you have control of your time in your personal life is just as important. And modern day motherhood has made it very hard for moms to feel okay with having any time for themselves.
Or just like blank space with the kids. Like we go
Totally.
outside and like walk around, and Frank, my older son, he's very structured and he's like, "Where are we going?" I'm like, "I don't know." Where do you want to go?
Tell me. You tell me.
you know? And so it's interesting. I read this article a while back about like the importance of boredom in kids. Like be bored. Like just have that blank space. And I think I agree with you so much, especially like as parents where it's supposed to do it all and do the swim lessons and the soccer and I don't, you were saying you were taking your kiddo to French and there's just so much to do. But I think honestly, the thread that I kind of gather from what you were saying too about your business, which I really, really believe in, is like do a few things well, right? Like I think
Right.
same thing if you try to buckshot it in business or in motherhood, right? You're just going to feel like you're stretching yourself way too thin. So I love the invitation there to just kind of assess both in a really similar way.
Exactly.
My gosh, so amazing. And I agree with you. We could totally have an entirely separate conversation on this. But I want to be so honoring of your time on your spring break and return you back to your family. And thank you so much for joining us today on Growing Pains.
Thank you so much for having me.